Thanks a lot. Matthew Lee, Inner City Press. Usually when you come, I have questions on peacekeeping, and I definitely have some this time, but given this revelation of the John Ashe case, I want to drill, since you're here, you know, as the two financial kingpins of the system, I wanted to ask, there were questions raised in this room, how what's described as the sort of very complicated and very sort of openly sloppy financing of Mr. Ashe's presidency could have taken place with a comptroller and auditors and board of auditors. And Stefan, the spokesman, sent us a series of documents, one of which does list a trust fund to support the PGA. It's a very small amount of money, but what I wonder is maybe the comptroller can describe what is the full extent of your jurisdiction over how money is spent by that office. Also, what, you know, in further inquiry, it turns out that there was an event, and I've also asked Stefan about it, called the Day of the Peacekeeper, that was sponsored by something called World Harmony Alliance, which is another business interest, a guy called Frank Liu. And what I wondered, there's a letter from the DPKO to them saying, thanks for the $100,000. And I spoke to the gentleman, and he said that he thought he would get a photo op with the Secretary General in exchange or as part of the transaction. How does money like that get accounted for? I mean, it's definitely money given to the UN. And what's your sense of, is it appropriate for a donor to believe that they're going to get a photograph with the Secretary General for whatever purpose out of it? Thanks.
Thank you very much. This is a very important issue, so I'd really start with general position that we have now. As I explained to you earlier, that the UN depending upon not only assessed contribution, but voluntary contribution. There are many worthwhile projects, humanitarian activities, development activities, human rights activities also. There are so many activities, and of course climate change, all this development area. We really have to have partnership with private sector. This is a fact of the life. But the question is how then we administer this, manage very correctly to avoid, mitigate any misuse of the fund and other things. That is, I think, a task that we have to be responsible for this one. For that purpose, the UN has very, very strict framework under which we are operating. That is what we're talking about, UN financial regulations. And the UNDP has their own UNDP financial regulation. We are responsible to managing UN financial regulations. So receipt of the fund from member state or private entities have to be administered according to these financial regulations. And under the financial regulation, we have very series of regulations controlling, managing how to receive. When you receive the money offer, the program manager have to monitor carefully and then find out if the fund is strictly consistent with policies, aims, and activities of organization. They cannot just accept the money. They have to ensure. That is a responsibility of program manager when you're approached by offers. That's one thing. Second one is money must be accounted for, must be registered in account. And then when the money is spent, in the system in the UN is a very, very clear segregation duties. No single person, whoever powerful, cannot make expenditure alone. I cannot spend money single without approval of somebody. Nobody. We have approval officer. You can approve something, but it must be certified. So this is a segregation duty. And of course, it must be audited in other things. So this is the general principle I just want to tell you. Second issue about support of Office of PGA. I think it's important to explain the financial status of that situation. First of all, Office of President of General Assembly has the budget of regular budget, first of all, about 300,000 per year. That provide a certain number of key staff and key activities, that one. But it's very clear, expansion of, these activities. And nowadays, responsibility of PGA is very different from 30 years ago, 20 years ago. It's extremely busy because the session of the General Assembly meeting all the time and the high level other things. Activities expanding, subject expanding. So as a result of this regular budget portion is not sufficient. That's why 2010, this trust fund for support of Office of PGA was created. And this basically to support the additional staff or some official travel they make. And this, trust fund is UN trust fund. It's very clear. Controller has full control of this one. Receipt, spend everything. This PGA cannot sign and spend money. That must be certified by the Executive Office of DGSM, I mean Conference Service people. It's very, very clearly. And this fund has received about, $1.2 million since 2010, 5 years, last 5 years, 6 years, 2 million. And almost all contribution come from member state, except one in 2010, called MacArthur Foundation gave some money, 2010. But since then, there's no private, nobody, only member state who support Office of PGA. That is bad. And then use this money, as I say, is administered very strictly, certified by Executive Office and so and so. And then we have the full accountability on that one. Question is, what is going to happen beyond that? For instance, if what we have understand from indictment, other things, the account was created outside UN account. And that was used. If that is correct, then controller, you can control this one, has no way of knowing this one. Because the controller can only authorize opening a bank account for UN. But somebody goes to a bank and then open some account and other things without telling other things, there's no way to know things. So but I think it's important to emphasize is that to the extent it comes from UN, that receipt we have to vet very carefully, and also expenditure also. So that the UN has a fairly strict internal control mechanism. But the question is, what is going to happen outside, for instance? That's one thing. And that's the issue, I think, at this moment. But probably controller want to add something here.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Takasu, and thank you for your question. Indeed, the trust fund, it's in support of the office of the PGA. So these are not funds that come to the PGA, him or herself. They do come to this trust fund, which is under the UN's authority. So you have to imagine that it's like a shield, right? That once these funds come into these shields, they have to be accepted through a process, as Mr. Takasu has just described. And furthermore, they are deposited in a UN bank account. And under the authority given to the Secretary General and from Mr. Takasu down to me, I am the only authoritative person to open a bank account, or my treasurer, basically. And I am aware of all the bank accounts that are under the UN purview. When then a request for expenditure comes, it has to go through all the financial rules and regulations. In other words, if it's a procurement, it needs to go through the procurement channels and rules and regulations. If it's a human resource, it is vetted through the channels that we have set in place. At the end of the day, also, I am the only one who disperses the funds, because I'm the only one who can disperse the funds from those bank accounts. So the trust fund in support of the office of the PGA is really no different than many, many trust funds that we have. The trust funds are the vessels, if you wish, for which these voluntary contributions come in. And they are under the full purview of UN financial rules and regulations.
But even this, if you don't mind, the travel that John, when you read the thing, he traveled to Macau. He said it would be $30,000 for an unofficial visit, $60,000, according to this FBI document, $60,000 for a, quote, official visit. And he took close protection of DSS with him, presumably. I mean, that's in one of the other documents that was provided by the spokesman. So I guess I'm just wondering, in your shop, as serious financial people, when you compare what's described that he did and your knowledge of it, have you started putting it together? Like, for example, who's buying the plane ticket for the DSS guards to go to Macau? Is it John Ashe or is it the UN? Is it DSS? And is there some way for you to figure out, I mean, it seems it's a pretty extraordinary comparison, this relatively small trust fund of $300,000 and what's described in the document. So I guess can you say a little bit more, what do you intend to do going forward to compare this circus-like behavior for a year with your extremely kind of narrow, seemingly, consistent bookkeeping?
Yeah.
Certainly, the funds that we receive and that we accept are, as we said, for the aims and goals of the organization. It is understood that the President of General Assembly, in his role, needs to perform certain functions. Now, as I say, when the President of the General Assembly or any other person in the UN, any staff or a person requests a travel, they have to explain what this is for. So there is a line that says exactly what is the purpose of the funds. And this has to be certified and agreed. So, of course, as we all count on the integrity and the goodwill. And as international civil servants, we have great responsibilities to ensure that those funds are used in the best possible way. It's our responsibility. Reckless, or I cannot judge, but behavior that is not in line with the integrity of an international civil servant cannot be maybe avoided altogether, but we certainly have in place all the internal controls to mitigate that happens.
Well, if I may just add, that is kind of issue exactly that we have to really establish. In other words, I say several resources, regular budget resources, trust fund resources. These are legitimate, I would say, and then subject to very strictly. But there are apparently existence of another account outside the UN purview, and it is not subject to UN rules and regulations. And if that is used for some of the activities, for instance, we are not aware of that one. This is the exact kind of thing that we really have to establish the facts. That's why Secretary General requested the OIOS to launch an audit on all these activities.
Sure. Thanks a lot. To a lot of these questions, you guys have referred to this OIOS review, but at least my understanding is only of two groups. It was only of Sun Kyan Ip and Global Sustainability Foundation. And the two individuals that are in the charge sheet or indictment are leaders in something called the International Organization for South-South Cooperation. Another group is called the South-South Steering Committee for Sustainable Development. There was also South-South News, which received $12 million from Mr. Yang and distributed it throughout. So what I want to know is, as financial people, do you think this is the looking at two groups answering the questions that have been asked here? And if not, is there some way that your office can produce at least just a dollar figure, how much these other groups that are not being looked at by OIOS gave to the UN, for what purpose? Do you see what I'm saying? Or can you use your position to say that it doesn't, because it just seems to me that no matter how serious the audit of those two groups are, it's not going to answer the universe of questions that exist. And my other question is to you, Mr. Takasu, since, and I say it kind of delicately, can you say whether you're aware of a request that was made by the 38th floor for additional plumbing to be installed after the Capital Master Plan was completed? I understand that there was some communication between the Department of Management and the Executive Office of the Secretary General about a particular proposed work, and I just want to get your perspective on it.
Well, easy to answer the last one, because personally I'm not aware. That's one thing. Second thing is about this. Obviously, you're saying that the scope of audit by OIOS is focused on these things. Is it enough, or that's a kind of question, I think. I can tell you from my point of view as Department of Management and also controller's point of view, I think we are responsible for internal control of finance of UN, including use of trust fund and other things. So obviously, we are very much looking forward to the finding and the recommendation of OIOS, and obviously we are very, prepared to take any action for this one. But I think it shouldn't be limited to that. And what I was thinking really is that we're going to, review again our procedure, particularly vetting process that has been asked. Again, we do have rules, we have a system, and then program managers are instructed to check very carefully on this. That's a rule, but is it practiced, for instance? This is the kind of thing I think in parallel to that we can do, for instance. And also, to your information, I want to say this very important thing going on in parallel to this. It's not prompted by this recent news, that in response to the recommendation of Board of Auditors, which was made last couple of years, we have been working on this establishing comprehensive anti-fraud policy. It has started much earlier, but anyway, it's perhaps timely. We have a working group in my office, and I told them to expedite this work. And so that we are going to report to General Assembly's resume session. We are responsible to submit so-called accountability report, accountability system, and this is a very important area. So this is additional information that I just want to share with you.